but unfortunately they can't. They've turned it down as low as they can. So Michelle, I'll get you to come and sit down here. And then
Nice spot. Oh, looking good. Oh, you're looking very good. Does it down and go back?
yes, it does that. Okay. So, and this is the microphone.
I don't think it's going to go.
Let me see if I can put it down. Oh yeah, that works.
Yeah,
That works well.
that's probably even better.
Even better.
Because,
Yeah.
closer in.
And then you can actually be heard. If anyone comes, you'll give them their badge and get it. Where was mine?
So I would like to develop the sticker. So yeah, the sticker is for what your takeaway from our today's event. And the yellow one is your suggestion for our next future topic. Yeah,
You can do that such.
yeah. So
I think I put yourself in there too. It's like,
I'm quite sure I need to be in there. What is oh, it's that funny thing. Yeah. Okay. No, that's actually quite good. That actually works. Okay. So let me just find my notes.
Oh, that looks lovely.
nice lighting. I like that lighting. Something's better than my usual Zoom. I look at my Zoom going, oh my gosh, people got to look at that.
I think I might have it on a slightly.
Ah,
Ah,
Yeah,
all focus.
it's the secret.
Okay, so thank you for coming, and very much want to first of all acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I will look to guidance on which land we're on. I come from the land of the Camaragal people in the Eora Nation, but we're on the land of terrible people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So we're here to learn more about the concept and importance of intersectionality and how people's lives are shaped by their identities, relationships, and social factors. Intersectionality acknowledges that every individual has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, arising from multiple identities that intersect and interact with one another and can marginalise them. Ethnicity, gender, race, class, marital or employment status, caste, religion, weight, location, physical appearance, sexual orientation, the list goes on. Michelle's here to show us how, or tell us a little bit about how to embrace intersectionality in the aid and development sector. Michelle is well positioned, working at the UQ International Development Unit as a senior manager in business development and engagement and advisory, and GEDSI, which I'm sure Michelle will explain. She's got over 30 years experience managing complex multi-stakeholder projects in public, private and university sectors. She's a project management, risk leadership and cross-cultural communication specialist with expertise in gender, peace and security and Pacific engagement. And Michelle has a deep passion for supporting women to see their potential and understand that they're empowered creators of their world experience. over to Michelle for a little bit of background on your area of expertise. And we will have lots of questions, I have no doubt.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you so much for the extension of the invitation and to be here with everybody tonight. Firstly, I'll just give a very quick and brief introduction to, I suppose, where I come from and how my lived experience flavours how I see intersectionality and GESD, which is gender equality, disability and social inclusion, which is the industry and sector standard these days. And so I was born a very long time ago. I started my career in the Australian Air Force.
Oh, right.
And I will just say this was before my awakening of the fact that, you know, I may have been discriminated against because I was not of the dominant hierarchical structures in being in the Air Force, but I never felt when I was there that I had been discriminated against. So in hindsight, looking back, I can see all the nuances. And throughout my career, I went from the Air Force, I worked in the Federal Public Service, I worked in one of the Big Four, who will remain unnamed at the moment, no controversy there. And then I came into Queensland government. And probably the key thing through all that was very much around project management, risk management, and evaluating. So always having that outward gaze, usually, as opposed to an inward gaze. So always looking from the outside in, going, what can we do better? How can we make this more efficient, effective? And I always had a passion for history. And so this is what led to my, I suppose, current incarnation of the work that I do. I went back to university. I had a base accounting degree, so supposedly an accountant. I went back and did a Bachelor of Arts at UQ and graduated with honours in medieval history, Welsh medieval history. So anyone has a question about Welsh medieval history, I can answer it.
I come from Wales.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
I have a few.
brilliant, brilliant. And it was interesting. So during one of the subjects in the honours, it was found all the different theories of history. And one week we had feminism. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, I can do this. That 1 week changed my entire life. It's quite interesting when we talk about turning points in your life and in the world. For me, that was a dramatic turning point where I just saw everything that had been in the past and everything that was potential in the future just like go, I knew nothing, I know nothing. And since that time, and it literally changed the reason and the grounding of what I was doing my PhD in. So I went from wanting to be a professor of history to instead doing a doctorate in gender and international studies. So quite a big difference in what I was looking at there. And what I found in that week was that, you know, we don't know what we don't know. And that so often confines us within the norm, within the structures from which we grow up, you know, repeating the errors of our parents and previous generations. And until you know, that one spark, and finding that one spark can actually change somebody's entire world and outlook. And so since that time, I was looking constantly to what that would be. And so I went back to my role in government, and I started looking around the stuff I was doing and going, one of the key projects I did when I went back was reviewing the department I was in, their leadership program. And before I'd done this particular subject, I would never have questioned the accessibility and the opportunity for all leaders within the department to actually do that program, because it was a residential program. It required people to be away for 3 days. By that stage, I did have young children, And normally I would not put myself as a person into my work, but in this case I did. And so the outcomes and recommendations, I said, well, you need to have another option. You know, it's not equitable to say that, you know, it must be a residential course. You must go and stay at a hotel and be with everybody, and that's the only way you can do this course, but to actually have other options available. And it was quite enlightening because it went up through the audit committee and they went, oh, we never really thought about that. And yeah, this would have been about 2009. That's how recent, you know, it's quite scary just how recent that was, that they weren't actually thinking about that. Mind you, one of my first jobs in government was to review the Office for Women here in Queensland.
Wow.
And I can tell you the attitudes of the people who directed me to do this wasn't necessarily with the view of, yes, let's make sure it continues. But I'm very, very, very proud to say that, you know, the Office for Women here in Queensland is a very strong advocate for women and girls in this state, and has gone from strength to strength, despite the, I suppose, the structural limitations of the broader structures in which it actually works. So I started my PhD in 2012 at UQ. When I was looking for a topic area, I came across the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which had the unfortunate, I suppose, timing of coming out not long before that fateful day in 2001, which really was a turning point in world history. So while it started great guns and, you know, really drew on, you know, the Beijing Platform for Action from 1995 and the continual, you know, feminist platforms to actually push through and make women, peace and security a reality, it didn't quite, I suppose, create or didn't achieve the aims that it was actually looking to achieve. And so my whole PhD was around, you know, why not? Why didn't something that in theory, and the fact that, you know, it was recognized within the Security Council of the United Nations, why wasn't actually hitting the mark? And so I looked and I used as my case study and spent 5 weeks over in Liberia in West Africa, because at that stage, due to the civil war that happened there and the women's movement, it became very much the poster child of the UNSCR 1325, which was the original Women, Peace and Security agenda. Security thing, totally blank. And it was an amazing experience to spend time with the women who actually, you know, were out on the airfield, who did the protests, who stood in and protested at the peace talks in Accra and demanded that the war stop, and understanding from their perspective what changes were enabled at the end of that war. And I came from it from a justice perspective. I was a Nancy Fraser, you know, guru fan. I was like everything to do with Nancy Fraser. I was like, yes, I'm going. And I intersected the pillars of the WPS agenda with the, you know, the 3 pillars of recognition, reparation, and representation. It's like, yeah, I can make all this come together. And I remember on my first evening over there, I had dinner with the head of the UN police, who happened to be an Australian at the time. And he just looked at me and said, we should do dinner before you leave and just see, you know, what you find out. Anyhow, by the time I left Liberia, I'd actually totally changed my frame of reference for my PhD, which you're not supposed to do, but it was necessary. But my framing was very much around looking at how gender in particular goes through, you know, the original with the gender as equality. We're doing the equality debates. Then we went into, okay, no, it's not about being equal. It's about we are different. We need to be recognized for difference. And then I framed it as women as diversity, but it was based on intersectionality. back when I was doing my PhD, intersectionality was still, you know, highly contested, highly debated. And we spoke about whether or not using intersectionality would derail some of the stuff I was looking at doing. So I used the word diversity. It seemed a bit more acceptable. And so one thing I was going, okay, fine, you know, diversity, that looks like it's the way to go, understanding that we're the intersection of our identity. And so ideally, that's the sort of framing you'd actually want to have if you're trying to make change. And particularly in a post-conflict zone, you've got that small window of opportunity. You know, a lot of the social norms get broken down during conflict, and in the recreation of society after conflict, you have this opportunity where you can create new structures. And it was in that post-conflict moment that you can go, yes, we can actually change the way things were. What I found was that in speaking particularly to the women's NGOs and the women advocates, is that for them, they were still very much in the difference frame. Diversity was not something, and intersectionality was not something that they could actually have a grasp of, because they'd only just left the equality frame, for starters, with going, you know, I'm equal to, you know, my male counterpart. And now that the point going, well, actually, no, we want to be recognized for our uniqueness as women, as opposed to our uniqueness as our diverse identities. And in a lot of particularly developing countries, but even in like Australia and America and the UK, some of the more divisive, I suppose, splits is not necessarily along the lines of gender. It's along the lines of religion. It's along the lines of ageism. It's along the lines of ability. You know, gender is, I suppose, that old chestnut, but when you start bringing in the diversity of people's identities, you know, someone, oh yeah, I'm quite willing to say that I'm equal to a woman, but I'm not willing to say that I'm equal to a person of that religion, or somebody who has a certain sexuality and stuff like that. So they were very much, you know, yeah, no, we recognize we came together as a group across religious rounds to create peace, but now that we're here, we want to re-own our own space. And so I found that incredibly interesting. And in the work that I've been doing now for the last 6 or so years with UQ International Development, particularly throughout the Pacific, I've seen those questions and those identities come back up again. And I think the hardest part about intersectionality is not the theory. The theory, I think everybody gets. Everybody gets that, you know, we are all extremely unique individuals, that our lived experience creates who we are. And, you know, we see that in our families. You know, 2 sisters or a brother and sister can grow up in exactly the same family, you know, supposedly have the same experiences, but come away with so totally different interpretations of what they felt was their lived experience within a fairly controlled and small environment. And so, yeah, we all understand that, but how do you put that into practice? How do you, in the work that we do, whether it's in, you know, delivering, you know, capacity building programs, whether it's delivering, you know, policy advice, how do you actually put that into practice when you're splitting the atom not in 2 but into, like, you know, a dozen different pieces with different fragments everywhere? And so I was thinking about this before coming here, and I'm thinking that whole thing around identity politics is extremely hard to make policy around and implement. Policy probably is easier to make. It's like, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to be inclusive. We're going to include everyone. We're not going to discriminate against anyone. But how do you actually implement that when you don't know what all those, you know, those intersections are? It's not like, oh, it's this, this, and that. It's like, well, no, there's that and that and that. And there may be like 3 people in this community who actually identify as that type of intersection. And you're in a community of 1,000 people. How then do you actually, you know, look at that 1,000 people and represent all without you know, further discriminating one group against another group, inadvertently, usually, because it's international development. It's usually, you know, good intentions that you go in with, going, you know, want to assist, want to provide guidance. And so what I've found in particular is the best way of looking at intersectionality and implementing is to listen. It's to really, really listen, not just the, oh yeah, tell me about yourself, you know, tell me about the difficulties you've had, tell me what it means to be a Muslim in a majority Christian village. It's about really hearing what they have to say, and then not presupposing that you know the answer. It's about going in with, you know, blank slate. I have no idea what's happening here. I don't know how to assist you to build your capability because I don't know what your capability is. So it's about really grounding it and actually, you know, understanding and listening and hearing from the ground up and understanding those nuances about, you know, yeah, well, you know, oh, actually, no, religion in our particular, you know, circumstance doesn't really, you know, we're quite tolerant, you know, we don't really mind, but it's, you know, oh, this, you know, it's sexuality, or it's like, oh, you know, it's ethnicity. No, we can't do that. We can't cross that line. Or particularly in a lot of cultures, ageism, you know, well, you are disrespecting me as an elder by bringing a youth into this conversation, and understanding, well, when does that apply, when that doesn't apply. And so it's about, I suppose, doing that groundwork first. And it's not about a one size fits all. It's not about, okay, we've got this sorted out here. We've got this model. Let's go implement it somewhere else. And that's another key thing I learned when I was in Liberia, is the idea of the women's peace huts. That was a ground up grassroots initiative by one of the amazing women's groups over there, and they implemented it in different places. And then the government went, oh my gosh, look at this. This is really working. They're actually using these huts and really having those conversations at the grassroots. So, okay, we're going to fund these. We're going to actually go and put them around to all these different villages. The difference being, of course, is they decided where they're going to put them, and they funded it and never involved the local community. And so more than one anecdote was, oh yeah, no, yeah, the goats, you know, they enjoy that hut. It gives them shelter, but they don't actually use it, because the peace huts themselves was like, you know, they had to go and negotiate, get some land. Okay, yep, you'll give us land. Okay, all right, we need to build something. Who can give us materials? Who's going to do this for us? So it was really that ground up. They built it themselves. And to me, that very much is, you know, I suppose, an image of an intersectional approach. So it's not about presupposing the solution on a problem that you actually don't know what the problem is. It's actually about identifying, okay, we've got a problem. How do we solve it? By bringing in all our resources. And in the work I do, particularly in as a Jersey advisor with the Pacific Fisheries Leadership Program, in teaching them, you know, what does intersectionality mean, and knowing that most people will just glaze over when it comes to theory for this sort of stuff, and trying to link it back. So it's around leadership, it's around management, it's around, you know, greater impact and outcomes. And I just say, you know, you've got, you know, you're in a meeting, there's 5 of you around the table. The first thing you ask is, who's not here? You know, who don't you have here around the table? Because often it's like people only look at who's there. It's about looking at who's not there. And about those who are there, who are you actually not listening to? Who does not have a voice? You may have included them in the room, but they don't feel enabled or empowered to actually speak. And thirdly, it's like, you understand from your own perspective the diversity of your experience and what you bring into decision making and your leadership. Times that by 5 of the people in the room, because you are not the same as any one other person in that room. And so when you put that all together, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to have innovation, you're going to have new ideas, you're going to have greater impact, and you're going to reach a greater group of people and have greater buy-in, because you're actually thinking of perspectives that you haven't actually come across before. So I will say it's not, it's not, you know, here we go, boom, we can do it. It reminds me a little bit about the good old, you know, gender and development days. It's like, here's gender, you know, you just add women and stir type thing. And intersectionality is like that on steroids. It's like, it's not just adding one thing, it's adding like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? But also I think it's understanding that different countries, different groups of people are at different stages. And that's the one thing I found in the research I did. It's you really need to understand what I call the equality practice grounding, the framework is what's the history? You know, is there a history of equality politics? Is there a history of difference? So do they have anti-discrimination, you know, norms and legislation, regulation? Do they have equality, you know, regulation and legislation? Because if you don't have fairly sound frameworks and regulation around that, you've got no hope of going in there with ideas around intersectionality because you don't have any basis from which to run it from. And so I like to think of it as a stool. There's three legs. You've got equality, difference, and intersectionality, and they're going to be at different, you know, heights depending on where you go. So it's about, okay, a certain country or a social norm might be, we recognize uniqueness and difference, but there's not necessarily a lot around equality and not a lot around intersectionality. I say, okay, well, maybe we need to bolster this one. We don't need to work on the difference, and we need to bolster this to try and get it to bring it all up to make it a level seat to go, okay, yeah, we've got. And so it's not about, you know, oh, you know, equality. So, you know, 1980s, you know, difference also 1990s. It's like they all have a place, because you would never have gotten to intersectionality without first starting with equality, and you would never got to difference without equality. You know, and difference is that first step before getting into intersectionality. So it's about the intersection of those debates as well. And so in and of itself, people going into this field need to have that understanding and grounding of what it means to have equal access, what it means to have equal opportunity, and then to be able to look at it from, okay, how do we expand that out from our usual understanding of that. I think I need a drink of water now.
That's fascinating. And it's really interesting because our last event that we had in May focused on peace building and peace keeping, peace supporting, peace maintaining. And in every conversation, women were at the centre of that. But so were other groups. Other groups absolutely needed to be there, but unless they were at the table, they didn't have a voice. So that's really interesting that you were also talking there about
Yes,
the peace huts. And was that around in Liberia?
Yes.
Okay. And that was around the whole activity on how to have peace in this country.
Yeah. So what it did is the peace huts flipped the social norm of the male domination in a local community. So the peace huts were actually run by the women. Right. They're the ones who sat at the head and invited people into their space to speak.
Okay.
And so they flipped it on the head. So they, as I said, it was 100% difference. It's like it's totally turning around. It wasn't about equality. It was about difference. It's about changing that paradigm. Right. And it certainly wasn't thinking outside any further into intersectionality, about inviting a diversity of people. It was very much along the lines of women, and they would allow the men to come in, but it'd be at their invitation, right, as opposed to generally was like just the male heads would make all the decisions, and you know, they might listen to a woman, but it was like very much they were the head. So it was about flipping that around and, you know, administering justice and such through that. So just changing the way they did things.
Great, interesting. Questions for Michelle?
So Michelle, you said that it was really, it's really difficult to move the dial in terms of being able to to work out what are the practical ways of working with intersectionality. And that you talked about the pillars, having to have the recognition of the diversity in the first instance. One of the interesting challenges here is about how in your work have you been able to bring the conversation around intersectionality, and what are some of the impacts that you've seen from your work about just raising the issue and the awareness?
Yeah, well, I remember I was doing research to deliver a session around GESD to the fisheries leadership, and I went back in history around and very much focused, okay, what can I find in fisheries? And so fisheries was interesting, like in PNG, they actually had a video of Rachel Laruru, I think her name is, who was a female fisheries officer, and followed her journey about being a female fisheries observer. And I thought it'd be interesting to actually see how the paradigm has changed, particularly in fisheries. And I found various articles from the United States, of course, where male fisheries inspectors launched a claim in court saying it was discriminatory against them to have women come out on the boats because, we just disrupt. And, there is this conversation. I was in the Defence Force. There's always a conversation around, oh, we can't have women here and do this, kind of people of varying sexuality out in the trenches, all this sort of stuff. Of course, in America, we're going to go to litigate. And what I found, it was interesting because I could see like there was a lot of the barriers up with the participants to start with, going, we're talking about women, do we really need to be talking about this, And when I got them to read the articles, they were like going, oh. And then when I said to them, I said, when you go out and you do your surveys and such, who do you talk to? Oh, we talk to do you need to, can you go further than that? Is there, who else is there? It's like, oh yeah, there's that group, but they're, oh, no, wait. Yeah, I should look at, talking to them, because they obviously also have an impact on the ecosystem and what we do. And we have some wonderful advisors on that program where we could, get case studies of where, decisions are made within a village going, oh, we're going to move this area over here to be a non-fishing area. You can't go and actually interact. It's going to be a protected area. But nobody actually spoke to the women who that protected area in particular was where they went and they did their stuff. They did, the shells and stuff like that, because that was close to where they were. They could still, do their other duties at the same time as bringing it. And that was subsistence, farming for them in the fishing to actually keep their families. And so they're like going, oh yeah, we need to actually take that into consideration in our decision making. And even similarly, we did some work over in PNG, and PNG has, the GESI policy, and that was framed up very much the work we did in their leadership programs. And we get anecdotes back from the participants at the end going, I actually had a conversation with my wife when I went home. I never really considered her perspective before. And again, that brought me back to that, I had that spark of awareness sitting in a history lecture, but in the work that we do, we can spark that awareness, because that's all you need to do. Because once you're aware, once you open that door, you can't unsee it, you can't close it, it's always going to be there. And it comes back at the most unique and unexpected times. And we do get that conversation back from a lot of the people we've worked with going, I never really thought about it from this perspective before. I never thought about, coming into my building that it's all stairs and that somebody in a wheelchair wouldn't actually be able to get into my building. And it's like, and a lot of the case, a lot of people don't think about something until it's right there in front of them and it comes up. Whereas like, what's always been an issue is just that there hasn't been somebody to trigger an incident out of it. And so I think that's probably the key thing. And once you've got that hook, I suppose, is getting them to look at something and go, oh, yeah. And like a lot of them go, but we will get this and that. Why is it different? And then you start going, have you thought about this or this? And I think particularly as women, we tend to have a more intersectional perspective a lot of the times anyhow, because we need to. And some of the stuff that we take for granted, we don't necessarily understand that others don't view the world the same way. And so we won't necessarily say something. I know I'm guilty of that as much as the next person, going, why do I need to ask? If I'm doing this and I have to ask you to do it, then surely you're making it as though I'm the one who has to do it, or it's because of my identity that this is the task I have to do. And literally the other person will go, I didn't even think about it. And so it's about opening the conversation, having the hard talk, and it's an uncomfortable talk for a lot of people, because you can just people looking at you with blank eyes going, what is she talking about? But even if you get 1 in 10, it's a start, and then they'll start talking and it starts that little avalanche going of sparks going off everywhere.
So you mentioned the Jessie policy.
Yes.
What is that?
So that's the gender equity and social inclusion policy. Jessie, yeah.
Got it. Sorry.
Yes.
That was the thing I missed it.
Just be interested, because I used to do sharing before. I did work in India and did a lot of work, particularly with communities discriminated based on caste, and then looking at the intersection between gender and caste. I had a very interesting conversation, particularly with the women's movement in India, because there would be quite strong resistance to this idea of interrogating difference.
Yes.
And to also casting, because if you're looking at certainly caste discrimination in those communities, a lot of it was coming from women. From other caste groups as much as it was coming from men. So I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of the work that you're doing and the frameworks that you're seeing or interactions, do you find you get into very interesting conversations also amongst women in terms of that challenge of understanding difference and understanding privileges that exist within
absolutely.
Yeah.
One interesting one, I remember I was running a course at UQ, and in the first week it was all around privilege. And particularly in gender studies, it's usually about white male privilege. And in this particular course, probably 70 to 80% of the students in the class were international students. And so I remember one of them came up to me going, I'm sorry, I just can't understand what privilege I have. And I went, okay, so where do you come from? And she told me. I went, and other people, where you come from, is it a rich community, is it a small poor community, blah, blah, blah. I went, okay, think about where you are right now and where they are. Do you think this is? Then she went, yes. So sometimes when we, have been, I suppose, given an identity to hold on to, and particularly, the women's movement is one of those. It's like, I'm a woman, so therefore I can hold on to that identity. Intersectionality split that a bit, because it brought in particularly, the origination of that was around, ethnicity and gender. Why are you splitting me away from the group that I actually identify with as my ethnicity just because I'm a woman? And it is that breaking it down that even further. And as I said, in Liberia, it was like the NGOs are very much based on religion. There was a separate, Muslim group to Christian groups. And it's like, no, we did collaborate on that, but it wasn't necessarily something we do, as a day-to-day activity, because they had their own identity. And that's, I think, is a lot of the challenges come in, because that identity gives them power. And when you're saying that your power no longer fits to this particular identity, and when you start carving it up, that power gets, dissipated. And for people who've been subjugated for such a long time discriminated against, it's something for them to go, but I'm here now. I've made it to the top of the pile, so to speak. And then it's like, oh no, we're shifting the boundaries. We're saying, no, that's no longer a pile that we consider as an acceptable pile. We're actually going, there's now 20, 30, 40 piles. But it's like, but I just had this. And I think that's exactly the sort of stuff. It's like, but I identify to this, I'm not ready yet to shift. And, over time that will shift. Because it's about, understanding that, power doesn't only have to come as power over, it's power with. And I remember seeing on some stuff on LinkedIn around champions of change, where the conversation now is around power. Because we put all these things in place and it's still, we're not shifting. And it's like, well, what aren't we talking about? And it's power. And I think that is a key issue for intersectionality, is you have to deal with that chestnut. It's the big chestnut, the other one being patriarchy, of course, but it's like, power is very much there at the heart of that, because, that's where they get that sense of, okay, now I feel like I have a group, I'm included. But not necessarily recognizing that you're included at the exclusion of others. Yeah. Yeah, no, good point.
And it's an interesting thing that you raised before about privilege. So it's when you have privilege, it's very difficult to see it. And I think that was, the example you gave was really apparent. It is very difficult to understand privilege. And so to then have enough empathy to understand other people's disadvantage requires that extra step of stepping out, because this is not my lived experience, because this is where I know the world. And what might that be? And how threatening is that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you think about it, at times we go into these communities and we expect them just to pick up on, we're here to say that, you're all, regardless of what your lived experience is, this is the way it is. It's almost like that, the political correctness movement. It's like, can't say this, can't say that, this is what you now need to embody. And it's like, you don't even know me. How can you expect me to embody this, ideal of intersectionality and take into all these, into account all these different perspectives, when I'm struggling to even understand who I am as a person and where I fit within the society I'm in. And the fact that, the society they're in may not be ready yet to recognize that. And you may be, again, not only, causing discrimination for them further, but actually, putting them in danger at times of like going, you raise expectations. It's like, you open the window, here, you can look out. This is what the ideal is. Sorry, no, that's not available to you. But yeah, I had to show it to you because, that's what I'm here to do, to show you the possibilities. But it's about balancing the possibilities and potentialities with reality, and, focusing more on those small steps. And I think that's something in particular the international development sector can really learn from, is rather than going to try to get those big goals, we want to achieve this. It's like, it's about the small steps. It's because, without those baby steps, you're not actually going to get anywhere. And if you focus on those, then the outcome will come. And it may not look what we think it's going to look like, but it will be an organic and an authentic outcome that you get that's actually works for the different circumstance that it's in, not what our ideal is of what it's going to look like.
And that's the essence, isn't it, of intersectionality, is about being able to be responsive to the variety.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so that the solutions are, what worked here is going to work there. It is the solution that's right for here, dealing with all the variety.
Yes, yeah. Which is hard in a world where it's all like, you need to meet these KPIs, you need to have this outcome, and it's like balancing that with, the reality is that we're actually being, faithful to the theory, faithful to the essence and the fundamental underpinnings of intersectionality, then that all falls away. It's about, what is right for this situation. We can't predefine that. We can't say that they're going to go from A to B to C. They might go from A, they might drop back, and then go forward. It's a more a zigzag as opposed to a linear trajectory, which they probably tend to expect, because that looks good in their documents and they can get more funding for this and do that.
That makes me think, because how there's now this shift. It's been going for a long time, but a long time, in the way that intersectionality has taken a long time to emerge, is also this whole shift around localization and locally led development. And I wonder, where are you going? Okay, understand that we're still trying to, I guess, grapple with this idea of what it means to yield power ultimately. But also at the same time, how do you also ensure that as you're yielding power, you're creating spaces, accepting that even in a local context, there are huge power differentials and gaps. You're yielding power just to the elites.
Yes, exactly.
Power in a way that allows everyone to interrogate.
Yeah, because often you're reinforcing the structural inequality with what you're doing, because you only really have access to those people who are already at that.
It's easy to do.
Oh yeah.
And it is the challenge, because we're coming with very technical solutions, so let's train them, have run focus groups, let's talk about things, let's do all of this. Whereas the shifts are really about beliefs and values and so on, and hence incredibly complex and can only be driven from within. And hence the reason why, very clear reason why the peace huts that you described earlier worked well when they were self-driven, motivated, and came from a place of original design, supported, versus this other idea of let's fund them in here and here, none of the work.
Yeah.
We also then challenges the way we do development, because often it's always about, oh, look, this pilot is working.
Yeah, let's go replicate it elsewhere. Yes.
I realized that a lot of it actually questions that and accepting, well, just because it worked here, do you fully understand the whole circumstances that made up why this worked well? But how do you then accept that actually replication and scaling up isn't always the answer? And I think that's hard, because we're pushed as a sector to go, oh look, this is success. Either emulate that in another completely different context, and yes, we'll try and adapt it, but do we really adapt it, or do we just have a little bit of consultation and then we go?
It's like, no, we can make that bit, squish that bit in there. That's close enough. Stuff is good enough, surely. It's like, no, absolutely. And I also find it's interesting is we try and project all these ideals and systems.
Which don't work here.
But exactly. Then it's like, have we do that internal gaze? How well is that working for us here? Have we actually, mastered that system here? And I always found that interesting. And one of the pieces I did was around, women, peace and security in countries like Australia is all focused outwards. It's like, how about you turn that gaze inwards, and you'll find that we are failing miserably on women, peace and security in, internal unresolved conflict, let alone, we focus outwards, we provide that, out to others, rather than, taking that critical gaze and looking at what we're doing and, what our issues are in this country compared to some of the countries where we're going and saying, oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can do that.
Yeah, and it strikes me that the concept of the international of the intersectionality stuff is all about the levels of different collaborations that you can draw people into the issues with. And I was thinking, just in the frame of the work that we do with Share the Dignity, which is an Australian-based period poverty works on providing pads and on their board. What's really interesting about that work is that the work is actually all done through different organisations, so they have a small component. We have a small component of work that we do in this space. But the real work is done by everybody else in the space. So, you know, lots of women's charities and lots of organisations that want to support women and girls in a whole range of different things. And this is just a small segment of the multiple layers of things that have to happen. And it just strikes me that the intersectionality piece, because it's women in domestic violence, Indigenous women and girls, they're people in you know, social disadvantage. All of these people are the people who are, you know, are intersectional in their disadvantage. And this is just this small piece in plugged into a range of other services that are there. And I'm wondering whether there's, you know, opportunities about how do you do that from a collaborative perspective, about there's certain skills and specialties that you can bring to a small element. So I'm going to, your thought has made me give some further consideration to that, and something we'll take back and we'll talk to our founder and board about, because it is, you know, it's looking at, well, what is that intersectional piece that we provide support to that helps them open the, you know, literally open. Thank you.
So my question is, how do you overcome identity politics in development? And is identity politics good or bad in intersectionality and in diversity?
Yeah. And so that's, to me, that's the biggest challenge of intersectionality is the identity politics. Is you can't, it's front and center. And yeah, you know, it's
good or bad?
I wouldn't put it in the sense of good or bad. It is, because it is how we understand ourselves. And so we don't want to strip that out. And we certainly don't want to put, I suppose, judgment on top of that. It's finding ways of working with it in a positive way and understanding that working in it a certain way over here might be positive, but working that same way over here might be negative. So it's about understanding the context of who is within the area and the grouping that you're looking at trying to make a change with. And again, it's about starting small. It's not about trying to tackle a problem up here. It's about trying to find, I suppose, looking at some of the causes more so than the consequences. So often we look at consequences as opposed to looking further down and saying what's causing that consequence to happen. And so we're like, oh, we need to address this because this is happening. It's like, okay, that's happening, but there's probably 10, 20, 30 different things that actually feed into the outcome that we're trying to address. So it's about breaking it down and coming at it from a lower level. I think that's the only way you can start getting a bit more of a handle on the different interplay with identity politics in particular. You know, within each of us, there are times when we are torn. We are torn between, oh, I really want to do that, but I know I need to do this because, you know, my religion says this, my culture says this, my heart tells me this, and having that struggle within yourself. And so intersectionality again is like that on steroids in a much broader sense. So just like, you know, how many decades has it been since the first wave of feminism? Centuries from the actual first wave. It's like, and I say this to my participants, it's not an overnight solution. It really is a generational shift that we're looking at, but it does take every single one of us to do it. It's not about, I'm not going to worry about it, somebody else can worry about that. So I don't think intersectionality is the same as, having, a movement that will shift things along. Intersectionality is more personal. So, you had your women's movement, which you needed because it was a greater force that needed to happen. For me, intersectionality is about the individual and them recognizing that they have a voice and their voice is valued, and providing the support for those voices to coalesce and have that groundswell, as opposed to this big overarching, let's get out there and shift things forward.
I think to include that is the recognition of the voice that you have is also equally as disempowering to others.
Yes.
And so it's that the impact that you're having in exercising your own
Oh,
right
absolutely.
across the
Yeah.
others. I've been thinking about the women's, the women's movement, and thinking about it's. I know this is may not come out right, but its simplicity in that it was about women, and it was initially, sort of pretty much white women of privilege, of education that moved it along, and it was a single sort of issue.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas you end up with a complex system, complex systems with identity at the centre of it. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the concept of intersectionality. Very easy. And so, so there's not going to be a right answer. So unlike the feminist movement, even with the idea that for over the patriarchy and took over the world, that was never going to happen easily. But on the same deal, not everybody wanted it, and so the same concepts of the intersectionality with further layers makes it even more complex.
So I would say that intersectionality to me is not just about the individual. I mean, it is, but it isn't. But it's individual in relation to others, in the sense that, because I go maybe and how intersectionality is maybe looked at in, say, an Australian context will be different, for example, from a context in Global South, which is much more communitarian, where it will be about, okay, people shift out in and out of these different groups, depending on that combination of gender and caste, and gender and age, or gender and other, but sort of accepting that you're part of these different groups that you move in and out of, and that some of those groups give you privileges, some of those
give you disadvantage. Yeah.
But I also agree with what you're saying in terms of but how do you also then deal with the effect of people that are being oppressed based on different factors for a number of years? How do you accept that you have to give them? They fight for recognition.
Yeah.
They fight for that politics of being recognized.
That is a key fight, is that recognition fight, fight for the recognition. And then redistribution again is that it's similar to your equality and difference. You're recognized, but now I need redistribution to actually prove that there's a reason to be recognized. And then representation, it's like, well, who's going to actually stand up for what we have to say, and do we actually have a voice broader than just our own little group, and how do we actually get into that broader? Love Nancy Fraser. And yet not once, that doesn't, and when she was writing stuff like, intersectionality was coming up, but you didn't have to actually mention the word intersectionality to know what she was talking about. Was like, it's bringing in these different, and again, she talks very much around identity politics. And that's why I think it sits probably more around those justice debates, as opposed to the feminist equality difference debates. It really it stretches it out a little bit more. And I think that's what makes it more difficult, as we were saying before, is a lot of this stuff happens 100% in the box of feminism. And so how many realists are having these debates and talking about this? It's like, it's very much within this box, and when you do that, it does bound it a little bit, you know, fantastic critique, you know, feminists are the best critiquers there is possible, you know, very scathing at times of each other, but it's like, you know, and that's why it's such a rich theory. But again, it's about how do you get that out there into the mainstream, and actually make it part of those broader debates, you know, and, you know, get it into the debates about people are having around identity outside of that, the feminist frame, because it does get delegated. It's like, oh, it's you know, the women talking, you know, again, this is just ignore them, you know, we'll just continue on with the
couple of questions about you. You've already talked to us a little bit about the turning point in your life when you saw women in history in a very different way and worked you up to feminism and all of the work that you've done. In your career, what have been the things that have really helped you most in getting to where you are today? Because you said you started in accounting and here you are, in a completely different area. So what were the career steps or points that where things have helped? Because those things help other people to think about, oh, well, that might help in my career.
Yes. I have a saying that I'm a Jill of all trades and a mistress of none.
Absolutely.
And for me, I think it is interesting. I think a lot of my philosophy, I suppose, comes from my upbringing. Like my parents were born in the 1930s. So, you know, I was born in the 1970s, but I might as well have been born in the 1950s. My first crush was Elvis Presley. I was devastated when he died when I was a child, a very, very young child. But interestingly, I was brought up in a family where I understood the ideals of the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s. And I suppose particularly in the case of Australia, ignorant racism, I suppose is the word I'd use. Like
That's generous.
Well, I take from the point like my dad would say things, but he was literally unaware of what he was saying was offensive.
Oh, yes.
And when I brought it to his attention, he's going, oh, I never really thought of it like that. And it wasn't that I was brought up in like any different, like I just grasped that going, you know, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sit right with me.
Yes.
And literally every career change that I've had is because I've reached a point in a role that I'm in going, you know, this doesn't actually just feel right for me anymore. I left the Air Force when I was 26 because I was a bit bored in what I was doing. There was no more challenges for me. Similarly, when I left other roles and I didn't have any jobs to go to when I left most of my roles, it's because, you know, this is not doing it for me or something else piques my interest. And I suppose I look back now, it would be courage to say, hey, you know, I'm leaving this because I can't be here anymore. I can't go against who I am inside. And I had the ability most of the time to do that because I didn't have a family and mortgages and all the rest of it. But I'm finding myself in a similar situation now where it's like you can continue to, you know, deny the voice inside you and die a little bit more each day as you go about your job and going, you know, yep, I'm doing this. Yep, it's bringing in a good paycheck. Yeah, that's great. But, you know, you spend the rest of your time trying to find something that is your passion. And so I've reached that point of my time in life is like going, you know what, life is too short. You spend way too much time in the workforce. You need to be working what you're passionate about and not being afraid to pursue it, because you know what, you put it out there, you'll get it, because the world can't read your mind. You know, people go, oh, I didn't know that about you. I went, oh yeah, I like that. They look at me going, oh, okay. I said, no, I don't talk about it because that's not this thing. It's like, and as soon as you talk about it, you get a connection here, a connection there. And next thing you know, a whole new world opens up to you. Exactly. So yeah, so it's about making decisions, taking actions that actually align to who you are and what your values are and what your passion is. If you're not happy where you are, then, you know, make a step, even if it's only a small step. It doesn't have to be like, you know, oh, we're just going to quit here and go travel the world. It can be just like take a small step towards something that you like. It might be, you know, volunteering, which could lead to other opportunities in a field that you're really interested in and make new connections.
Sounds great. And finally, what's the biggest challenge that you faced in your career, and how did you overcome it, or who helped you to overcome it?
My biggest challenge was myself. Yep, it was myself. And having faith and trust and belief that I have skills that are recognizable to other people and that are valuable and worthy. So it was very much that that self-doubt, you know, and self-confidence, and pulling down the barrier of putting on a fantastic poker face of appearing confident and, you know, very possessed and, you know, yes, I know what I'm talking about, and it's like, and being vulnerable with other people and going, you know what, I really don't know what we should do next. And yeah, just stepping down and going, you know, we're all here together, we're all equal, you know, I'm no better. And I've always had that feeling like I'm no better than anybody else. Yeah, certainly didn't grow up that way. I was always like, oh, these people, you got to put them on a pedestal, do this and that. And I learned through my career going, you know, I can go and talk to the head of the organization. They are still a human being just like I am. And I can recognize that in others, but sometimes it's very hard to self-reflect and bring it back. So that has been my biggest challenge. Yeah. And there are still days when it's like, oh my gosh, what do I think I'm doing? But there are other times when you do show that vulnerability and you get that feedback, and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, I can make an impact, and that gives you the motivation to keep going.
Yeah. I think that us in this room, certainly me, absolutely can align with that and have absolutely been in that same position. For somebody who's in a position that you are, which is a very senior role, there are a lot of women out there who are going to be reassured to hear that even people who are really achieving great things still feel a little bit unsure of themselves, doubting themselves. And the key is, as you say, just get on out there, be vulnerable with people, show that you can still do it, and you can still pull your big girl pants on and keep going.
Oh yes. And this is the point I tell you, I'm 99% introvert, and
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a lot to be said for learned behaviors.
Yes, absolutely. I am definitely an introvert. I absolutely would find hardly anybody who'd agree with it, because I'm out there and talking. And I think that's the same thing. You just learn how do you deal with that? How do you sort it out? But look, thank you for speaking, Michelle. Fantastic.
Lovely.
Small group here.
Yeah,
but there will be more people online listening. We have a little gift for you. Our beautiful Women in Development mug.
Oh, fantastic. They'll do well with my coffee.
Guaranteed to improve the taste of coffee and tea.
Oh, brilliant.
Thank you so much for coming. You really have given us a really interesting insight, and I've learned an enormous amount. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk about something that I'm passionate about, which I don't necessarily get to talk about every day. So yeah, no, it's been a real honor and privilege.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do come back. We've got another event we're looking at doing in October. We may do that. We may wait until International Women's Day. We have a mentoring program. So if you're interested and you'd love to mentor some younger women, or you'd like to find a senior person to mentor you, we can do that for you. We have a volunteering program. Yanrui is one of our Brisbane volunteers and very valuable. And as she said, we'd love to get a little bit of feedback from you, key takeaways from those who are listening. from the session, and any topics you can think of that you'd like to hear us organise sessions on, because there's a lot of topics out there, and so the more feedback we get, the better. And there's a couple of topics on that sheet there that came out of a previous event. So there's sort of 3 topics that we might think about. But thank you again. Fantastic evening. Thank you. And do help yourself to some more wine.
Oh, that was great.
Okay.
Michelle,
Thank you.
Yes, so at ease.
This is where I go, oh, let's go.
Hopefully it wasn't too scary.
No, I was